So today's lesson is about hashes. As we discussed in class, a hash is a construct which is similar in some ways to an array, but with the distinct property that you do not actually access parts of the hash through an index, a numerical index, as you do with an array, but instead through a user-defined key. So let's talk a little bit about how we would actually create a hash. So if I want to create an empty hash, I can create a hash like this. I can say we're going to use a hash to keep track of a season record. And actually, if I use curly brackets, as we discussed in class, we will get a hash object. And in this case, this hash object is empty. So what can I do to actually add elements to the hash? Again, every element of a hash has to be what is called a key value pair. And the only way you can add an element to a hash is to actually use the key that you are interested in creating. So in this case, the W key for win. And you can then assign a value to this key. So in our case, we're going to start by initializing the hash with 0 wins. We're going to do the same thing with losses, and we're going to do the same thing with ties. This is actually quite a cumbersome way of creating a hash, so we'll discuss in a second how we can do this more efficiently. But let's take a look. If I do Ruby season.rb, you will see now that when we say puts record.inspect, we get actually a construct that shows 3 keys, W, L, and T, each one of them with value of 0. That actually gives us a hint that instead of these cumbersome 4 steps for creating the hash, we could instead have just said record is equal to a hash which is comprised of the first entry with a key of W and a value of 0 with a symbol in between, an equal and a greater than sign that we call the hash rocket symbol. And so I could have done basically my initialization of the hash in a single step like this. So how do I actually use a hash when I want to get, when I actually want to store a value in the hash, or I want to retrieve a value from the hash? Well, we access the hash the very same way we would of an array, with the distinction that we don't use a numerical index, but we use the key of the element of the hash we're interested in. So let's say, for example, that I would want to add 1 to the number of wins. I would simply do record of W, which is this value is the value that holds the number of wins, is equal to record of W plus 1. So I'm adding 1 to the number of wins. I could have abbreviated that, of course, with a plus equal, and that would have worked. And then if I want to actually show what this value is, I can just say puts record of W, and it would actually print that on screen. Again, let's run it to see how it works, and we can see now that we are getting the hash here, and then the number of wins is now 1. So can I tell whether a particular hash includes a specific key or a specific value? So let's talk about a couple of different ways to do things. The first thing that you can do is that you can actually look at a construction which is the record.keys. And what that is record.keys is an array, an actual array that contains all the keys of the hash. So if I say puts record.keys.inspect, and similarly I can do puts record.values.inspect, then you will see when I execute this code, that we get here two things. When I said put records.keys.inspect, the Ruby actually retrieved all three keys, the W, the L, and the T, from the hash and put it on screen. Similarly, the values corresponding in the hash were all put in an array. So I get 1, 0, 0. Sometimes you actually want to be able to check more, a little more easily whether a hash contains a specific key or a specific value, and for that there is a special method you can call on a hash, which is hasKey or hasValue. So I can do things like this. If record.hasKey of W puts this hash has a key of W, else puts this hash has a key, does not have a, sorry, this hash does not have a W key. Okay, and if I run this code, then we expect it to tell us that this hash has a key of W. On the other hand, if I change this code, so I'll copy and paste it, and I change this to check whether it has a key of S, then Ruby will check and will let me know that this hash does not have an S key. Everything I just said about hasKey works with hasValue, so I can also copy and paste this code again and just say, instead of checking for a particular key, I can check for a value of 2, for example, which currently does not exist. So it will tell me that this hash does not have a 2 value. How can I then remove an element from the hash? So let's say that we actually add a new element, and we say that record of foo is equal to 6. If I do a puts record.inspect, as we would expect, there are now 4 elements in the hash, and the fourth one has a key of foo and a value of 6. Let's say now that I want to get rid of this. How would I do that? Well, I could just say record.delete, and I have to give it the key that I want to delete, and will remove the key value pair. So I will tell it to remove the key foo, and when I then check the record again, you will notice that it actually has been removed. Finally, let's talk a little bit about looping. There are several things that you can do in terms of creating loops to see what's inside of a particular hash. One way to do it is to actually leverage what we just learned by saying that we can take a record and we can go through all the keys. So remember, this is now an array of all the keys, and do a dot each, and for each one of those we will retrieve the key and actually store it in the local variable key, and then we could simply access the value through the key and put it on screen. So we could say puts key, so I'm going to use string interpolation here, key value. How do I access the value? Well, the value is obtained through the record, and then inside of the record we actually want to grab the value corresponding to the key. So we use the local variable key to actually access the value, and then we're done. So again, if I do this, you'll notice it says key W is a value of 1, key L a value of 0, key T a value of 0. It turns out that there is another type of iterator if you want, which is especially useful in the case of a hash, where we can retrieve both the key and the value at the same time. And the way we leverage this particular iterator is, instead of iterating through the keys, we will actually just iterate through each element of the record. In other words, the .each is going to give us access to each key value pair in turn. So what we'll do in the do and the vertical brackets is that we will actually retrieve both the key and the value in that order, and we will assign them to the local variables key and value for each key value pair of the record hash. So now we can say puts key, and we obtain the key through the local variable key, has a value of, and then in this case we don't have to go back to the record as we did in the step before, because we actually obtained the value and put it in its own local variable called record. If we now run this code again, we will see that in both iterators, in both instances, we're able to actually print out on screen the values of the keys and the corresponding values. And this concludes our lesson on hashes.